Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
So welcome to Insight. This is about property profit, which for us as a serviced office, it's obviously a topic that we're really interested in. But also I can see many faces in the crowd that are very involved in this industry as your career, and businesses that decide where they're going to work from. And also all of us are really involved in property because we're all part of this crazy Sydney property market. And congratulations to you two on part of that as well. Is that a secret? Cut that out then. So normally Jane Jose is here and gives the welcome to country, and also thanks you for the ticket sales, because each month we put through a woman through a business incubator for each of the insights we host. So she apologises she's not there, but it does give me a chance to talk about the welcome to country. For me, it was quite significant as I was going through the research about property, and to be honest, I was quite shocked at the extent of kind of our early history in this country. And I think we all know that the things that happened to Indigenous people were quite terrible. But for me, it's very significant because I think first, before we start talking about property, it's really important to acknowledge the original custodians of the land, and to acknowledge that we meet on the Gadigal, acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora, and also to acknowledge their leaders past, present and emerging. So I encourage you perhaps to have a look at the Thought article that we've got on our blog. The statistics vary from whether it was about 350,000 or 750,000 Indigenous that were here when white people arrived, but they all agree that it was about 90% decimation within about 10, 20 years, and that was through disease, but also through poisoning and massacres and things. So it's something that's very sobering. I personally was really confronted by it because I think we know that this is a bit of a dark history, but to really realise how significant it was, really took me sort of by surprise. So again, just to acknowledge, I think that we pursue the great Australian dream, but I think we've been fortunate to do that in a country where it did have a dark history. So let's talk about property profits. It's been said that the best investment on earth is earth, and it's certainly a major contributor to Australia's economic outlook. Our nation is quite literally built by our construction, our commercial and our residential real estate markets. And to give us an expert insight into each of these three markets, we've got three guests that I'm very honoured to have here. Who will I start with first? Maybe Josephine, ladies first. Josephine has been on building sites today. She's been in high vis and boots and high heels and everything. So her day is long, and hopefully we can get through this hour. But Josephine AM is principal and co-founder with Tony, who's here, of Build Corp Corporation. So certainly we're all familiar with that company. Build Corp employs over 300 people, and also an aside to that they've been recognised as employer and the best employers, which is one of the only construction industries to do so, and it's 2 years running as well. So that's pretty incredible. And also big revenue. I won't talk about money, that's impolite. You also chair the Build Corp charitable entity, and I'm exhausted by the things that Josephine does. So it's incredible. We'll get into a bit more about all those different things, but a big passion is the rugby league for both of you. Rugby union. That's a huge faux pas. Sorry, rugby union. The gentleman's game. So please save me. Josephine, come to the stage. Please welcome her. How can I say that? Now, Ivan Bresic started real estate internship from a tender age of 17, and in 2003 partnered with Shannon Whitney, and we all know Bresic Whitney. We've all dreamed and drooled over houses on the website, and this company has gone from a two-man band to having four incredible practices through Darlinghurst Glebe and inner city Sydney. So, Mr. Real Estate, we welcome you to the stage, Ivan. I'll get you on this side here. Pleasure. And to fly the flag for the commercial real estate side, someone who is very well known to me and I'm someone that I'm a big fan of. Barry Barton is the founder of Right Angle Studio. It's a company on a mission to understand and improve life in our cities. I'm incredibly happy he's here because his wife is about to have a baby. There's a whole angle around precinct placemaking and urban activation that I want to get into with Barry. So please welcome Barry Barton. So enough from me. I want to hear from each of you. I want to look at origin story, and maybe Josephine, we'll start with you. You were a scientist and a former teacher, and you were pregnant at the time that Build Corp, this is very interesting actually, maybe on the cusp of creating an amazing enterprise.
Can only hope.
How did you and Tony found Build Corp?
We did hope to one day own our own construction company, but in 1990, some of you may remember, there was a big recession, very high interest rates, and Tony came home without a job, and I was pregnant. Yeah. And we just fast-tracked that process, and he took over a project that he was working on at the time as a project manager, and that became the first Build Corp job. It was what would be today about a $200 million commercial project. And then our next one was about a $30,000 preschool fence. Yeah. And then we began a sensible Yeah. So for all the wrong reasons, a recession, the right outcome.
And for you, how daunting was that to kind of move into, I know Tony had a lot of experience with civil and civic, and but you obviously were ready for the challenge.
Well, I actually took a job on a construction site when we were engaged because I was at the Garvan Institute of Medical Research. I was in the diabetes research unit when I met Tony. I was doing an honours year there, and we wanted to buy a house, and I presented myself with Tony to a bank manager to try and get a loan, and he quite rightly sent me away with my tail between my legs because I was on a National Health and Medical Research Council grant, which is current for 1 or 3 years, and it was a 25-year loan, so I realised I needed to get a proper job, and I said to Tony, I can see a job being advertised where he worked. I'm going to take that for a little bit, and that was about 35 years ago. I didn't realise I'd love the sector. So
and the high-vis vest.
It wasn't the plan, and the high-vis vest, and the steel-cap boots.
So maybe Barry, we'll look at you. You started life professionally as a lawyer. So how did you didn't?
This is like the strange mythology about me. It sounds so good, but it's not true.
I know him so well. How do I not know this?
No, I have a law degree, which is very different to being a lawyer.
Yeah, true,
so I feel like I have a little bit more credibility. Sorry to you lawyers in the crowd. I think my professional story started in earnest when I lived in Melbourne, and I was really frustrated that I couldn't find the things that I knew were interesting in Melbourne, because Melbourne's difficult to get to know if you're new to it. And so the solution to that in my mind was to pull together an online city guide to Melbourne, which covered those sorts of things that kind of sat in the cultural cracks of the city. And that worked out really well, and so we ended up rolling that out around Sydney and Brisbane and Perth and Adelaide, and it ended up becoming Australia's sort of first online city guide network that was independent. And we ran that for about 5 years and then started getting approached by property developers, and they were saying, we're not at all interested in advertising in your guide, but we do want to understand what you know about cities. Yeah. And I never really thought that if, you've got journalists out on the street thinking about where are people going and why are they going there and why is that neighbourhood cool and why is that neighbourhood slipping and how's the city working, what do people want? That kind of journalistic endeavour was something that the property developers wanted to tap into. And so we ended up getting commission after commission after commission, trying to kind of reveal to developers how real human beings are actually using cities and what they want. And so we're here by accident in the dark arts of property.
Yeah, excellent. And here to stay. And then, Ivan, for you, there was no secondary career. You went straight into real estate at the age of 17, like we've said. Tell us about that and then how you worked with Shannon.
Yeah, no law degree, that's for sure. Quite the opposite, actually. It was, I think it was just by default, really. It was, I think when you leave school and you haven't done very well at school, you don't have many options. So for me, it was either real estate or hospitality, and real estate's quite easy to get into. So I started in real estate with John McGrath as a 17, 18-year-old in Paddington, and it was exciting. It was because I didn't enjoy school very much, so it was exciting. Like the people were great, and I looked in the garage, and there were all these amazing cars. I remember as an 18-year-old, I thought this is pretty special. But you know what? Naomi, I just enjoyed what I did from the start. I started as a junior, and it was really, for me, it was never going to work. I just enjoyed it. I was passionate about it from a young age. And real estate's one of those industries where it's pretty simple, it's pretty basic, but it's a lot of hard work, and you can evolve in it. And I was lucky that I grew in a company that was growing, that was on steroids at the time. McGrath was only a small company, if you remember. And it grew and grew and grew, and I was there in the early years. So for me, it was just a natural involvement. Shannon Whitney, who's my business partner, if you know the business, a lot of you may not know the business, but Shannon and I were working very closely together in the East Edgecliff office, and we embarked on Bressick Whitney back in 2003 in Darlinghurst on Victoria Street. And for those of you who are from the inner city, you'd know that we were specialising in King's Cross, which was a completely different area to what it is today. So, and I think with that, we grew. I think like most businesses, if you do the right thing, then naturally you will grow. And I think we have done that. And hasn't always been smooth sailing. We've made a lot of mistakes, but I think we've developed a pretty good brand.
And I think there's a really nice link as well, because for you were so passionate about inner city and the dynamic and the vibe, which is something that we're talking about, that precincts aren't just bricks and mortar, it's actually about kind of the human overlay. So we'll come back to that. I'd like to also look at professional partnerships, and you are eye to eye with your professional partner here, Josephine. So who does what? How have you worked out the division of labour?
Oh, we had to figure that out really early when we began the business, because clearly there was nothing Tony could do when I was 7 months pregnant to help me have a baby, and there was very little I could do to help him set up this business we thought was a great idea. And so we began a journey of dividing and conquering, and that's still the case. That said, it's an absolute pleasure working together with your best friend. It's fabulous. When you've got issues. Today we were together in the middle of the day for some heavy stuff, and you got each other to bounce things off. And I was in one direction this morning, Tony was the other, and came together for the afternoon and night. And I would normally be here of my own, but Tony always supports me in everything I do, and vice versa. So it's actually worked for us. A lot of people say, "Oh God, I think I'd stab myself if I had to work with my partner." And Tony and I are like, we don't get that. Why?
Yeah.
So for us, it works.
And also, you've resisted the temptation to kind of bring in other partners. It's the two of you.
No, we actually did have other partners when we began the business.
That.
Well, we weren't sure how Tony was going to manage this big behemoth of it. We'd never had a business, and I was 26 and he was 30 when we began Build Corp. Yeah. And so we brought in a couple of partners who we subsequently bought out over the years, and that worked really well for us at that time. That was terrific. But it's not resisting the partnership. It's about having an agility when it's very easy to be really interested in you. If you're on the same journey, and Tony and I are quite driven and aspirational and have the same, I think it comes from being married so young, you end up developing the same values and the same interests. And we did that, and it's just easy. It's just we can turn the business on a dime.
And I think that's testament to the different involvements in philanthropy, that you have the freedom to participate in that. So
well, we both do that. Tony began as the rugby person in our partnership, and these days I probably do more in rugby than Tony. And I began as a school teacher, and Tony only rolled off the board of a private girls' school, Kambala, last year. So somehow or other we were sitting reading board papers one night after dinner, and we looked at each other. I'm reading rugby papers, he's reading school, and we were, what happened here? How did this all go so wrong? Yeah, but
and I'll bounce back to you then, Ivan. For you and Shannon, how does that work? Where do you support each other with different skills?
For those who know Shannon and I, we're very different people, and I think that's kind of worked. So Shannon was a country boy, born outside Tamworth, very, very Australian, not so close with his family. Whereas, my parents have Croatian heritage. I was a Sydney boy. I went to boarding school in Sydney. I'm very close to my family. So we were complete opposites, but we had the same we had the same work ethic from the start, and we enjoyed what we did. And so I think as we grew, that gets challenging because you realise as you get older you have different desires and different needs and different wants. But the thing that was always very central to us was the business. And, I only got married this year, but I'd say for 15, 17 years, that was a marriage with Shannon, and literally. So I think, you have your good times, you have your challenging times, but we've always respected each other. To me, he's like an older brother anyway. And, I think I'd create some mischief in my 20s because my office was in King's Cross. We started an office in Glebe. We had a lot of fun. I was the one that got in a bit of trouble and he'd help me out of it. But I think it's just respect. And I think the longer you go, the more, the more that you share. It's like a relationship. And so I think you have a common respect that grows and you have a lot of memories with that too.
And then for you, Barry, there's often a very high creative process on these big projects. How do you pull together a team for different things that you're working on, whether it's overseas or here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that the first 10 years of Right Angle, and we're 15 years old now, but the first 10 years were like shamelessly narcissistic and some kind of creative dictatorship. And then I realized, A, that I was getting boring, repeating myself a lot, and B, that there was a lot of enjoyment to be found in actually employing staff and guiding staff and trying to kind of unlock some of the things that I'd learned over time and see what they would make of it. And so now we're in a really great position where I have a cultural director and I have an editorial director and I have a design director and I have a strategy director. And those are the sort of four kings that I need to navigate any of the work that we do. And we try and do as much of the work on a project as we feel best suited to do. Mm-hmm. But you inevitably, in a complex property project, come up with tasks that you just can't do in-house. And you have to have the humility and I guess the network of people that you can reach out to, and you say to your client, look, you want this done and we can only take it so far. So here is the right architect to work with, or here is the right, retail planner or whatever the case may be. Yeah, but I'm really enjoying that sense of team as opposed to the dictatorship. Yeah.
And it reminds me, we were having a conversation, Tony and I, about often it's like a real film director, the role. It's about bringing together a whole different host of different roles and actually staying on for the long haul. So I think it's a perfect analogy. This is about property profit. So I want to talk about money and money to be made in the industry. So again, Josephine, I'll come back to you because the construction has had a huge boom and it's been through, I think, maybe 4 recessions and there's been a whole lot of change.
1990, 2000, 2001.
And so again, the sector it looks like some people are saying it's downturning in construction, others are saying that things are looking good. How have you diversified and where is sort of Buildcorp putting their strengths?
A number of years ago, we bought a couple of properties and a couple of businesses, I beg your pardon, and bolted them on and organically grew too. And they are businesses that all complement each other and sort of rise and fall at different parts of the economic cycle. Mm-hmm. So the big new building business will usually be very busy when refurbishments and interior fit outs are down and vice versa. We have a joinery business, which is totally different business. It's a subcontract business. And we have a remedial building business, which is today dealing with a whole lot of these ACP, sort of these panels and that, but it up until a year ago, nearly all of its business was around, concrete repair and membraning. So they're all different businesses, but not too far away from our core strengths and what we know, but they tend to peak and trough at different parts of the economic cycle, which seems to buffer our bottom line.
And is property development something that you're exploring?
No, we have done a few developments. We were speaking about this earlier, Ivan and I, but that would be something we did personally. We don't do any residential, so we're not exposed to the resi market other than through the remedial business, and that seems to work the best for us. They're very big, and we're everywhere else. We're doing the big around here, the big St Vincent's Hospital redevelopment, and that's a large one, and then restaurants and commercial is the biggest part of our business up and down the eastern seaboard, but it's sticking to our knitting and knowing where our strengths are and where our people's strengths are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Ivan, this is again the question on everyone's lips about the Sydney market. So from the peaks in 2017, I think the market's corrected by about 10%. Where are we going? How do you see things panning out with the Sydney market?
Yeah, it's been a rough period. I think we had such a good, strong period for 4 or 5 years, which everyone knows about. Which was kind of unheard. Like we hadn't seen that sort of growth in so many years, and I think it was people enjoyed it. Real estate agents enjoyed it. Car sales people enjoyed it. Developers chin across the road and restaurants enjoyed it, and all of a sudden all our homes are worth 10 or 20% less. So, that's been a big adjustment period. It was a perfect storm, which we've all spoken about or heard about or read about. I think it's now, we get asked the question a lot. I was talking to Tony just before. I think there was a lot of nervousness around the election, the federal election, and the outcome there, and negative gearing, and if Labor had won the election. It was a Liberal, obviously, victory, which I think has started to settle some of the nerves in the marketplace, and we're starting to see that already around the city fringe. Interest rates are at an all-time low, and they've dropped further, 0.25 basis points twice over the last 3 or 4 months, so that's been positive. Investors are starting slowly to come back into the market, and I think also, there's a bit more Chinese investment, which was just abolished after a few years, which we're starting to see a little bit more of. It's going to be a slow recovery. That's my view. That's our view. But it's certainly feeling better now than it was 6 months ago or 12 months ago. Auction clearance rates are already up the last couple of months, which I think is positive. More buyers are inquiring, more buyers are inspecting. But I think it's going to be a slowish recovery over the next couple of years, Naomi.
And I'm going to ask specifically as well, were there suburbs that we should be considering? Is there any sort of secret pockets or any styles of investment, like maybe writing it down? Is it, like whether it's kind of apartments or kind of, I don't know, multi-development?
What did you say, Boris? Well, I heard something.
No, I don't.
Yeah, that's a really good question. If you look over the last, because we're always the middle person, so we're always selling for people, and people are buying through us, and those clients who've sold at losses are typically sold in a short period of time. They bought in 2016, and for whatever reason they really wanted to sell in 2008, and they bought in 2017, they wanted to trade in 2018. So, but if you're asking what areas, there's been a lot of talk about high density areas not performing well. Things like areas like Rosebery and South Sydney, which we perform a lot in, by the way. But high density areas have more pressure on them when prices and when sentiment starts to fall. Look, blue chip suburbs, funnily enough, we sell a lot around the city fringe and areas where young families are, and there's cafes in every suburb now, and there's good schools in most suburbs now. So, whilst location is really important, we always say, good apartment buildings, quality apartment buildings, close to beaches, obviously as close to the city as possible. But housing, you can't go wrong. Bricks and mortar, over the long term, you can't go wrong. So whether you're buying, in South Sydney, the inner west, or lower North Shore, if you're buying a home and you hold it for long enough, in time it's always going to do well. The most pressure I see from homeowners is when, for various reasons, often divorce or change of circumstances, they're trying to sell in a quick period of time. Because by the time you pay the agent, you're paying your stamp duty, you're making some changes to the home, there's losses there. Failing that, the other big losses I've seen in the last few years have been those who bought in high density areas, in apartment buildings that bought off plan. They've been sedated, or the seductiveness of an off-plan purchase in 2017, 2018, 2016, the seductiveness of a new development. They've paid full price, and then time comes to sell that. Upon settlement, the property's worth 10 or 15% less. That hurts. Yeah. So that's the only advice I could give, and that's my observations that we've seen as a business the last few years.
And it
or you can call me and I can give you some advice.
True.
Before you make that decision, or one of our people.
And it feeds into, for you, Barry, because you see a lot of this is to do with precinct and desirable neighbourhoods, and Rosebery has obviously become so popular because you've got things around the grounds and Dunning Avenue. So Barry, real estate and commercial real estate is interesting because as people in the room would know, things are good in commercial real estate. Occupancy levels are really low, the returns are really high, and yet we see commercial real estate's not just a utility anymore. People want this experiential overlay. So why are sort of developers looking into more precinct activation?
Yeah, sure. I think the mistake that developers often make is that they own an asset and they just think about their asset and they don't think about the surrounding context and all of the things that actually position that asset and make it a holistic experience. Like as an end user, as a citizen, you walk through the city and you dabble in a whole bunch of different things before you arrive at your building. So more and more developers are trying to understand the relationship between their asset and all of the things that go around, and how do they try and harmonize the connections to make things easier for people. And it's incredibly important because we've entered this era where, you know, really you can work from wherever you want, whenever you want. So the whole idea of an office, the purpose of an office needs to be restated. And it needs to be really good. It needs to get you out from your home, from your apartment. And so developers, in trying to like attract and retain their tenants, are having to work really hard to try and provide that amenity. And everyone knows that diversity or choice is a good thing. And so there's like this atomization of workplaces to become, sure, a core of work, but all of these surrounding and really, really important peripheral amenity, supplies. And it's incredibly important. Like one of the weird things that I find it really almost like depressing to see a whole lot of property developers who are almost like unaware of what the everyday experience is for people that work in the buildings that they own. And they're satisfied if they're giving sufficient returns to their investors at the end of the financial year, where at the other end of the decision-making spectrum, you've got these people who are in these one-trick pony commercial towers, and they're awfully designed and there is no support amenity. And that's a real problem. Like, I think we need to try and reconnect with the very human needs at the end of our property decisions and understand that the places that we're making, they're basically habitats for human beings. They need to have a dynamism and a natural quality to them and encourage people to be healthier and happier. And if we can invest in that sort of activity, which you do through creating a precinct, then you can have confidence the returns to the shareholders will work themselves out. Yeah. But if you just face the shareholders and you turn a blind eye to those end users, then I feel really sorry for the end users.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, the idea of responsibility in this sector to create environments, habitats is a great way of thinking. I'd like to look at the challenges of each sector. And Josephine, construction has obviously been a very male-dominated industry, and it's not been kind to women in the past, whether it's men wolf whistling from building sites or it's just not allowing women to work in management or even kind of driving forklifts. So tell us about Build Corp. You guys have an amazing track record of bringing women into the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question in 1985, when I first ended up on a construction site in Sydney, I did think that that was a specific construction piece. And then fast forward to when Elizabeth Broderick, a woman who was put into the role of Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, when she first took the role, and she's a family friend of ours, I said to her, "Oh, don't tell me, if you just got an inbox full of complaints about builders and that." She said, "Actually, I'm ashamed to say, they're more from my sector, the law, accounting." And as I moved into broader public company board roles, I realised that exactly the same behaviours were everywhere, but the builders were just more overt about it and comfortable. And there's kind of this really insidious in the boardroom. And when I sort of thought about it a little bit more, we have a very narrow pipeline of women into construction. So you don't see little girls running around school with Tonka trucks going, "I'm going to be a builder one day," right? And they certainly will go into some of the other, like our youngest is a doctor. And there's an equal intake of, if you look at medicine, the law, accounting, an equal intake of graduate men and women. And we have the same at Build Corp, an equal cadet intake of men and women. But as you get to the top of medicine, the law firms, the partnerships, it just does this. And I was interviewed, I'm on the board of the Property Council of Australia, the national board, and I was interviewed for a piece on by EY, who were doing a piece on sexism in property and how to get around it. And his poor partner began with, "So tell us about how bad you guys are in construction." And I probably got a bit over defensive and went, "Well, let's have a chat about the women partners in your business when you have a pipeline that looks like this and it does that. Where Tony and I are starting with this, and trying to do that." So actually, I found myself becoming quite defensive of the sector, not defensive of the behaviours. And what all we're talking about is behaviours here. I was speaking with Liz Broderick on a panel recently, and I realised that her whole life, when she was Sex Discrimination Commissioner, was telling professional people not to behave badly. Because let's face it, it's all it is. It's not behaving fairly, not behaving badly. And I thought, God, we actually need a role to tell people not to do that. Just don't be a... So to me, having had the business for 30 years now, I look at it and I think this is a behavioural piece. Culture underpins everything. Leadership starts at the top. It looks really easy if someone looks up to Tony and I, because we're equal owners in our business, always have been. It's how respectfully we engage with each other, how respectfully he speaks to me. I've got a lot to thank his mother for, you know? And what they see. You know, we work in open plan. Our people see us. Our children watch us, and you know, that's where it starts. So I have been very busy now doing different things with the Australian Sports Associations. This is my Twitter page today. We've been talking at Twitter about women in sport. Sport is probably one of the last bastions where you can actually create pathways just for men and not end up in front of Fair Work Australia. That'd be like Tony and you know, you creating a pathway to develop great real estate agents and going, you know what, I can't afford to send them to a great course, but what I'll do is just send them in. You'd be in front of Fair Work, so would I. Sport still does that, so I've been a little bit busy rattling the cages around sport. I think that's the last bastion.
And so you have women's cadetships in sport? Yeah.
In sport,
And
sorry.
then-
What we have now in rugby union, which is a sport that we support, we now have pay equity. The Australian women's sevens players are paid the same as the men's. But when we began on this journey, I don't know if you remember, there was an Australian women's sevens team that the last Olympic Games won a gold medal. And once I realised what had happened, of course, it changed. We're on the way home and on the way there, the men's team, who came sixth, flew up the front in business class, and the women flew down the back with their gold medals in economy. And
I hope
I
you
can
swapped
just
that out.
describe the rage. Yeah, because merit then stops becoming it. So if merit is the reason, well then now what?
Yeah. And it's interesting, there's so many great examples if you look through BuildCorp, but I love the men and women at work, the signs that you have up. So it shows that culture is just lots of these things that kind of are markers for people, and it's, I think, 82% higher representation of women than other industry, other construction.
Yeah, the building companies. And it was so great today. So I was sharing, Tony and I have just come from St Andrews College at Sydney University, which is a residential college, and we're doing some construction work there. And they were laying a foundation stone. And the Chancellor of the University, Belinda Hutchison, was laying this stone. And as we were walking through the site with about 60 people, and you know, it was a ceremony more than anything else, I was so proud to walk her through and stop at all of our women. Erin was there, and Kath, and all the girls, and for them to see her as here's what I can be, Chancellor of a university, and for her to see women on site, it's fabulous. Yeah.
Fantastic.
But we have a pipeline issue. We're working with little girls in schools at the moment. Got to shift that dynamic. Yeah.
And also, Josephine mentioned they're making more flattering high vis, which I think will help. Tailored high vis. So that's another.
Women have hips and booties than you.
And waist. So Ivan, I'm going to jump to you. The flip side of property market doing well is the severe unaffordability, and the Demography's 14th report shows that Sydney was ranked second worst, with housing prices 13 times higher than median household income. So we're second only to Hong Kong. This is a huge problem for particularly the millennial generation as well. What do you see as a way that people can maybe get into the property market, or are people just not even bothering?
Are we still second after the last 2 years?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure we dropped a few.
No, it's still, that was last year, yeah.
Look, affordability's been a big topic over the last couple of years. It's hard because I don't think there's no real answer to say, you know, how can we help affordability for the young people? Often we see at auctions, and you know, not everyone has this benefit, but often we see parents, you know, helping their children with a deposit. Not saying that's the answer, because not everyone has that luxury. It's getting difficult. It is definitely getting difficult. Low interest rates will definitely help. I think education around saving from an early standing point. Interestingly, when we talk to our people and we educate, we always say that buying your first home's the hardest. And I think, you know, for those who've bought in the past, the hardest is the first home you buy, whether it's a one bedroom or it's a studio, because it teaches you the disciplines of saving. It also gets you in the habit of putting money aside to make those interest repayments. And also you realise that time goes quickly. So over 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, that investment of $500,000 or the loan and the home it should appreciate over a period of time. and then things seem to get easier for people from that point. Apartments are expensive. There's no question about that. 10 or 15 and even 20,000 a square metre. This development just behind us here, Griffiths Tees, which is above Chin Chin, was one of the highest per square metre rate a few years ago at 30,000 a square metre. So there's no question it is expensive. But it does mean that gentrification, and you can see how the inner west and the young people are now moving towards inner west and Newtown, and you see Justin Hemmy's and the Merivale group buy pubs in areas now that are just a bit beyond your Surrey Hills or your Bondi and your Coogis. They start buying in Botany and further afield. Just bought a pub in Rozelle. So you see these sort of changes happening in the marketplace. So buyers then naturally start to look for better value as they push further out, Naomi. Yeah. But I don't have an answer as to how we can help affordability in Sydney.
Maybe following the footprint of Justin Hems, and that's a bit of a tip there.
Find out where they're buying.
Yeah. So Barry, when we look, I guess it's not an issue so much, but a challenge with commercial real estate. It's just that things are changing so much. We've got flexible working coming in, and you used to have these long leases and these buildings that were quite static. Now there's such a change. Yeah. How does something that's quite inert like a building adapt to the changing needs of business, or if it's kind of retail precincts where retail's changing as well?
Yeah. I mean, people in all real estate, but particularly in commercial real estate, seem to live in this constant state of panic, and you hear the word disruption every half hour or so. And I find it quite bemusing because on the surface of things, things seem to change in property. So if you look at Design or any of the architecture blocks, you're right, there's different shapes, different palettes, everything's changing and moving. But if you think of the underlying business models of property, things haven't changed for decades and decades. It's still the same old industry, just with a different veneer. So the first kind of advice we usually give our commercial clients is just stop panicking about change. Let's settle down and let's think about some of the more kind of enduring things that have proven themselves to be fit for purpose and workplace over time, such as the importance of solitude, being able to concentrate, cleanliness, natural light. All of these things are not radical new ideas. Yeah. I mean, really, when I think of the beauty of what you and Boris have upstairs in the office space, what I love about it is how old-fashioned it is. And yes, it's co-working, but there are all of these tried and tested virtues, which means that WeWork will come and go, and all of these fads will kind of spin around, but you guys will stay because what you're appealing to and what you're providing is something that's proven itself over thousands and thousands of years. So I think we should all...
don't make billions like WeWork do.
Well, they lose billions. They lose billions. I mean, I honestly, that could really explode in a catastrophic way. So, I think that if we're to reconnect with the very kind of primal needs that human beings have and think about what that means to a workplace, we'll stop jumping at the shadows of the future. And this whole notion of flexibility, why? When I buy an apartment off Ivan and my life changes, I don't feel it's a failure of the apartment that it no longer matches. I change the way that I live to deal with the space. And it should be the same with businesses. Why should they demand optimal flexibility and everything's always changing? Why can't they say, this is our space, this is how it works, and if our business changes, we'll try and adapt to that and work with the space that we've got. We just seem to burn so much money and fuel and brain cells trying to contemplate where's the exit strategy and how's everything going to change, and everything's moving around, and we're better off just saying, this is what is, let's work with it. Yeah, so our clients are quite often underwhelmed by our advice because we're actually, we're going to go back to the 50s and we're going to use some really old-fashioned ideas, and that's what's going to make you productive. Yeah.
How you say it as well, right?
Yeah, future classic.
No, yeah. I love that term. I've got one more question, but I'm actually going to slot in, and please be thinking of your questions because we'll have time at the end. I'm going to slide in a question as well from our friends at AMP Services. So Lisa Harvey has sent in a question which is, I think, fantastic. It's in an era where technology dominates our attention, leaving us disconnected and isolated as humans, and loneliness is set to become a new health crisis, what responsibility do we see developers and government to solve through how we plan for building cities and precincts? So maybe, Josephine, if we think about the responsibilities of this loneliness and, the flip side of kind of a connected community, where's the responsibility?
It's with government. Okay. But the problem is we can't rely number one, we can't rely on government to fund it. We can't rely on them to imagine it. And that's when citizens with a sense of civic duty begin to think about what do we do. Because as much as we want governments to fix and do everything, they can't, and they don't have the money to anyway. Right, so governments are there to regulate and keep an eye on how we develop these things and ensure that we are doing no harm. But honestly, I've not seen an awful lot of governments since the sort of Keating-Hawke era actually create social change that benefits the society. We just don't have that anymore. It's the same as happened with property. Back in the day when Tony and I were working for, Lend-Lease, Civil and Civic, Dick Dusseldorf was one of the last great visionary property people. They're in property at the moment, but then nowhere near the scale of Dick Dusseldorf, where he just reimagined a workplace, reimagined a city. So it's this business of reimagining. And interestingly, there's what's a place up in Brisbane that we stay at, the Lebanese developers at the Carlisle, right? Where 3 developers came together and essentially bought a precinct and reimagined the whole precinct. So a little bit of that, when you can have some collaboration between developers where they say, and this is what the retail precinct is going to look like, and this is so there'll need to be a little bit of that. Councils and governments, so then need to get out of the way. Right, of developers doing, I think they've got to say, here's what we need this much open space, here are your height restrictions, and then just get out of the way of creative thinking. And, let the barriers of the world and let them come in and say that, this is what we know, underpin it with a science and with people who actually know what this ought to look like. It does my head in when I see councillors knock back approvals for developments and apartments because they don't like the colour or the affect the streetscape. And I'm like, how are you qualified to speak on that? Whereas where we live in a 120-year-old house and there's no heritage order on it. And I'm like, well, how does that crap, get up and this doesn't have a protection on it? And so, who's qualified to make these calls? Right? We have a planning minister at the moment who's actually qualified to make this call, but we put him in education, for I don't know how many years, and he's got a master's and PhD in bloody planning, and we stuck him in education. Like, why? Yeah. So, hopefully with Rob Stokes in the...
Can I hear some amens, Kim Cristani? What's interesting on that, and I'll get Barry to respond, is how do you match the commercial kind of imperative, because these things have to make money, it's not a charity, with the culture and kind of civic responsibility? Is that possible?
I think so. Dick Dusseldorf, who you mentioned, I kind of see him as this philosopher that was trapped in a developer's body. And he said that we don't make buildings, we build lighthouses that people can guide by, which I think was a really lovely way of stating the ambition of Lend-Lease is setting a new way of living. And a lot of the developments that, I don't really like them for style per se, but the ambition to create harmonious communities, the way that he cared for his workforce, all of these things were absolutely exemplary. And I get really excited by that kind of change. A lot of the work that we do in property, the client will come and say, we've got a placemaking budget. We need to spend $1 million on placemaking, whatever that might be. And it gets spent always on public art and poetry readings and farmers markets and all of these things, which are just speaking to the people who already care about the place that they live in anyway. It's not putting the finger on the problem, which is the people that are ambivalent to where they live or where they work. And so I think that I'm more interested not in the extraordinary things that developers and businesses do to change our culture and our society, but the everyday things that we do, the way that we can design places or program places or manage places which are tolerant and liberal and respectful and exciting, and all of these things need to happen on a daily basis. They can't exist in one sculpture or on one vivid festival or whatever it is that kind of compresses our goodness into a particular type parameter. It needs to be every day. And I really agree with you, Josephine. It has to be led by private because government is failing us in so many ways, and I'm really advocating for a values-led approach to development. I would like some developers, even if they are publicly listed, to say this is what we believe in. Loneliness is important. Aging in place is important, whatever it might be, and begin to build to that, because I think that unless you guys do, there isn't going to be help coming from anywhere else.
Yeah. I think it's amazingly put. Thank you, Barry. I'm going to throw to you, Ivan, because this will be my final question before opening up to each of you. You have a community committee within each of your offices, and so for you it's very important that Breast at Whitney is positioned as a lifestyle brand. It's not just about selling houses, but you sort of look past, again, the bricks and mortar to the people that are living there. So what are the ways that the committee has been able to support local areas that you guys work in?
Yeah, I think it was, I think just by virtue of the fact that we deal with, we're in lounge rooms most days with, mums and dads and professionals, and I think I think as real estate agents, you just become part of the community. We manage a few thousand properties across Sydney as well, so I think you have a responsibility to put your hand up, I guess, for community-led projects. As the business grew and we opened a few more offices, we had more requests just from local schools, from parents, from clients about how we may be able to help. It became important to our staff. It was part of our vision, like you said, Naomi. So we developed, it was getting harder as the business grew for Shannon and I just to respond to everything, and you want to, but we found that it was easy just to have a central point, which was a community committee. And from that, we ensured that whatever we took on as a business, we had an allowance every year that we put aside, a financial budget, but we made a commitment that we would support charitable organisations that were to do with housing, so homelessness, Birds of Passage in Surrey Hills, Wayside Chapel in King's Cross, St John's up in Victoria Street. So, we've done mostly around homelessness and homes and providing. And in fairness, the community committee have done a wonderful job over the last few years, but it is difficult because we participate across so many suburbs. But public schools and local schools have had a lot of involvement in it as well along the way.
I think it's commendable. Yeah. And Josephine, we've mentioned the things that you guys are involved in. It's the things you're passionate about. So rugby union, opera.
I love the Cronulla Sharks rugby. Okay. Tony hates them. I love the Sharks. We're still in with a chance. Don't give up on them yet. Just may bring it home.
And then obviously equal opportunity. You've got the cadetships into construction industry, sustainability, mental health and suicide prevention. There's too many things to mention, but needless to say, both of you have been recipients of the Order of Australia in 2017, I think it was, for significant services to the country through a range of roles with sporting, social welfare and cultural organisations in the construction sector. So it's huge what you guys have done. Why is that so important to both you and to Tony?
Well, number one, we live in Australia. How wonderful is that? And we were able to start a business and educate our children and have them leave home, and they're now paying their own taxes and doing their own thing, and that's a privilege, and we never take that for granted. Our parents migrated to this country from Lebanon, and we look at our country, and you were just saying you've come back from Croatia, and we were only saying yesterday, weren't we, Tony, we'd love to be able to say, let's just go and have a lovely holiday in Lebanon, but the reality is it's occupied. It's in the middle of a war zone. It's really hostile. Actually, we went to Israel last year and didn't go to Lebanon, so we're very grateful for this country, and you can't have a business and be not taking from this community, but benefit from this country and not give back. It'd be weird, but I've got to say, we have got so much more out of the charitable work we've done than we've ever given. I'm going to say it's been an absolute privilege to do some of the work that we do. So.
And it's a huge time commitment. You guys are incredibly stretched time-wise, so it's not just financial, but it's important to acknowledge just the time and the effort that goes into that. And then, Barry, I'll get you perhaps to answer on behalf of developers. So we've references, they have...
Worst spokesperson.
So, I mean, we've said they've got deep pockets, but also deep responsibility to fulfil a civic role. Yeah. So what do you think they should be doing? I guess you've answered it with more of these loneliness initiatives.
Well, just, everyday attempts to improve society. It was interesting that the business roundtable that's just concluded in the States, which has the world's top CEOs meeting every 10 years, and they issue a paper at the end of it and they say, this is what we believe is the collective opinion of leading CEOs around the world. And it is Bezos and Cook and all of those people. And The report, which I think came out last week or the week before, was talking about a shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, and this importance, the necessity of looking beyond our own company's financial interests and to the interests of people that interface or interact with what it is that we create.
So and that's the stakeholders, the end users.
Yeah, the stakeholders are the end users. And I think more and more developers are behaving that way. I think like the winds of change have blown quite significantly through the industry. And so things are looking a lot better than they were 5 years ago. But until we really understand that we're responsible to a whole set of people and shareholders are only a fraction of it, we're going to develop some really life-diminishing places. And so they've got to, behave differently.
Yeah. Let's throw it open to the audience. Has anyone got a question for our panel? Don't be shy.
Just one question. Come on.
Come on.
Just one.
I have one more. Oh, great, thank you.
Thank you all. Awesome presentations. You all talked about the importance of people to the places that you create, and I guess from different perspectives, with Barry doing the kind of strategy and placemaking, and Josephine, you're all about actually creating amazing places with, people's bare hands. That's what construction is. It's phenomenal what the construction industry does. And they've come under fire recently, but they're an integral part of our, the places we live, the places that we work in. And Ivan, you're all about the people that, again, you kind of talked about your role in connecting with people, but I think the job that you do is incredibly challenging in helping people to find their pathway into a home, and many homes, I'm sure, over time. What do you see? I think one of the challenges that I come up against in the work that I do is what we're all going to do as we get older. So Barry, you talked a bit about social isolation, the kind of places that we work in, but what kind of places are we going to live in? Because I don't think we want to live in the kind of places that perhaps our parents have, and what's the future there?
And what kind of work do you do?
I work in social sustainability, so we work a lot with the property industry and with government.
Excellent.
I can take the
that?
first
Go for
stab
it.
at it, sure. The way that we live, like residentially, it needs to change. We did a project for CommBank, which was on the future of home ownership. And it was, entirely depressing if you believe that owning a house is somehow essential to your happiness. And so I think we need to start solving that problem and getting people to understand that actually it's not this mandatory factor. And I don't mean to undercut your business here at all, but it's like you can live a meaningful and joyous life without owning a house. And better that we get used to that sooner rather than later. I think through design and technology, we're beginning to reduce a lot of the friction in the built world and how we move through it. And so the notion of co-living in spaces, which kind of seems confronting for us at the moment because we think it's like always open plan and you'll be bumping into people all the time and, trying to work out where the co-owned vacuum cleaner is. All of that stuff will probably be solved through the intelligence of the design community. And so I think there probably is this really quite exciting place up ahead, which is designed to essentially bring people together. That's the point of good architecture, to lead you to be a better person. If you're disorganized, buy a modernist apartment, you'll begin to behave in a more organized fashion. If you're single and you're worried about being lonely or you're reclusive, you want to choose a place which through its design begins to nudge you towards some social interactions which you're going to find enjoyable. So I think that's where we're going. Like, it is more of a kind of cohabitation model. And we'll be using like the buildings that we design and the places we create to try and solve some social problems. We'll need to. We're sort of looking at the retail strategy for Waterloo at the moment, which is tricky because it's 20,000 people and 40% social housing, and it's forcing the retail team that we're working with to think about how you would design and deliver retail which doesn't make people identify as being of lower means. And the type of thinking that comes out of that social imperative is fantastic. It's really exciting. We're not kind of there yet, certainly not solving it. But it's really lovely to see property being designed with a social good in mind, much more so than it used to be. Yeah.
I think that's right. I think what we've got in property is a very low barrier to entry. So you can just hang your shingle and go, I'm a property developer, without any qualifications as to what would qualify you to be that. Same with construction. All right. Right now, Tony's doing a development on our place. I'm the owner builder. I mean, God help us all, right? But there it is. So the barrier to entry being so low, does that necessarily qualify us to be able to design and build our cities? Now, more regulation and a heavier hand around the construction industry. Tony and I are like, please bring it on, right? And get rid of the nonsense builders in here to allow the ones who are investing the money in the right processes and systems and safety, etc., all the things that we need. So there's a piece around who's qualified to do this work, and in our sector, the barrier to entry is so low, and we're getting what we're getting. Right, where price is the driver. What does that mean if I want to throw up a block of apartments in Waterloo and I'm the developer and I want to maximise a return on the investment of the piece that I made? Well, I'm going to look at probably the lowest price tender. Well, what have they missed? They've either forgotten something, or they've got less people on site, or they've compromised on the safety, or that. What have they missed? The price is the price is the price. You get it from the subby market, and they'll tell you the price. When you've got a whole lot of prices in front of you, and one is half the price of the other, they've missed something, or they're not going to include. So
It's quite obvious.
So we would go, please bring a greater focus on the industry, for God's sake, and shake out all of the ones that perhaps ought not be part of the system. Is that a bad thing to say?
No, it's insane that people who are not qualified make things that last for 100 years. Like, it's just an insane industry.
And Ivan, you see that in residential, it's the quality of what people are prepared to pay for, I guess. And you're saying those high density apartments, people get stuck with them if there's no value.
Did you have a particular question about because my industry is a little bit different?
Hi, great talk, thank you very much. I'm trying to get a question to link the three of you, and I think I've got one.
Go, Kim, go.
I'm the city architect at Parramatta, and we've been talking to lots of people about how to get better design. One of the things I think is really bad in the building in our industry at the moment, and links the real estate with the construction nexus, is that we are still selling apartments off the plan before they're even A, approved for a DA, B, approved for a CC, construction certificate, or 3, an occupancy certificate. Now, it may well be boosting the coffers of revenue, which I understand this week has dropped by $4 billion because of the market is about to shit itself, to put it bluntly. We think there's a bit of a silver bullet there that you could link good developers, get rid of the bottom feeders who aren't getting they're buying a site, getting an approval for 200, 300 units, selling it on to another arm, another construction or whatever. The value, the quality, everything just goes nosedives down to the south. Somebody in the middle is picking up the biscuit all the way through. And we're just churning all these sites around, and the people who are really doing, there's A to Z of developers, and the A to Fs, if you like, or the A to Gs are doing a really good job speculating, getting DAs, paying good architects, doing design competitions, and we need to get them a bit more oxygen and get rid of the bottom feeders who are just churning over sites that are just making the property market inflated. And we're getting really bad developments and very bad buildings.
So none of them are here, so...
But we'd all agree with you. Well, we'd all absolutely agree with that. I'm on a board out of Parramatta, a government board, the Parramatta Park Trust Board, and some of the deals and...
It's eye-watering.
Yeah.
We were just with Stuart Ayres today, weren't we, having a discussion about that, but I'll have a chat with him because I think that getting Western Sydney right...
I'm going to connect you two because Kim's been on a architecture panel it was on our Forward Cities panel, so I'm going to get you two speaking. I'm going to call it and wrap this up. Thank you everyone for your questions and to the panel here. And you'll see at the bottom our next topic. I've been inspired by Josephine and Tony's giving, and we're looking at philanthropy. And my goodness, this is a busy group of people. It's very hard to pin down. I think I've approached about 12 philanthropists. I will give you in a few days, we're going to have the final list, but please come to that. That's on the 24th of September. But thank you so much, everyone.